She thought I was too old to notice. She tried to steal my house while I was building our future, but I saw everything. And what I did next? Most men would never dare. Stay until the end, because you'll want to know how this story ends. My name is Frank Aldridge. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent a lifetime turning hard days into something worth living for. I built my consulting business from a one-room office in Austin, Texas, working 16-hour days, drinking cheap coffee, and believing every mile I drove for clients was building a future for my family. I believed my wife, Lynn, understood that too. At least I thought she did. About 8 months ago, I started noticing small things. Lynn's phone was always locked, even when she took it into the bathroom. She began coming home late from yoga classes, carrying that faint cologne scent that didn't match any of mine. We had dinner at our small oak table, one we'd picked out 20 years ago, and I'd watch her eyes drift to her phone when it buzzed, a half smile on her lips like I wasn't even there. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I've learned in 63 years that emotion clouds judgment, so I watched, I listened, I waited. And as I was signing a contract worth over $5 million in Dubai, my phone rang. Her voice, cool as winter air, told me she had sold our house, that she was leaving, that she'd found someone better. What Lynn didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment. I had spoken to Paul McIntyre, my attorney, and we had quietly frozen the title transfer when she tried to move the house into her name for tax reasons. She thought she was taking everything from me while I was across the world. She didn't know she was dealing with a man who'd built everything he had by never letting a betrayal go unnoticed. I want you to remember this, friend. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes softly, with a phone call across 8,000 miles. Stay with me, because in the next part you'll see exactly how I turned her betrayal into the last mistake she would ever make against me. I landed back in Austin on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the clouds hanging low over the Texas hill country. The drive from the airport to our house on Riverside Drive took me 50 minutes in traffic. Windshield wipers tapping like a slow clock, counting down to the moment I would walk back into a life that wasn't the same anymore. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Lynn's car parked next to a black Ford F-150 I didn't recognize. Boxes were stacked near the front door. Through the kitchen window, I saw her moving around, wrapping our dishes in newspaper. Plates we picked out 20 years ago when we barely had enough money to pay the mortgage. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the rain drum on the hood, steadying my breath. Then I stepped out. I didn't knock. I walked into my own home, and there she was, standing in the kitchen, startled, holding one of my coffee mugs. "You're early," she said, trying to sound calm. "Flight got in early," I replied, setting my bag down near the door. And then he walked in, the man she had chosen over everything we had built. Todd Becker, late 40s, maybe 50, with that fake confidence you see in men who sell used cars. He was wearing my University of Texas hoodie. He tried to smile, extending his hand like we were meeting at a barbecue. I didn't take it. "Frank, this doesn't have to be ugly," Lynn said, arms crossed. "We found a new place, the buyers are excited, and you just need to sign the papers." I looked at the manila folder on the table, the pen placed perfectly next to it. I picked it up and flipped through. My name was typed neatly on each page, waiting for my signature. What they didn't know was that I had already frozen the title, and the moment I showed them the proof, everything shifted. You see, some men would sign to avoid conflict, but not me. Stay with me, because in the next part you'll see how betrayal meets quiet justice, and how a man who has spent his life building will never let a thief take it all away. I set the folder down on the counter, looking at Lynn and Todd, letting the silence settle between us like a heavy Texas summer heat. You know, I said, keeping my voice calm, I've spent the last 30 years negotiating deals worth more than this house will ever be. Todd shifted, glancing at Lynn, his fake confidence cracking for just a moment. The key to any deal is knowing what you have, what the other party has, and what everyone truly wants. I pulled out my phone and opened a text from Paul McIntyre, my attorney, sent just 30 minutes before I walked in. I turned the screen toward them so they could see it clearly. Fraud claim filed, title frozen, buyers notified, escrow locked. Lynn's face went pale, her mouth opening, but no words came out. Todd took a step back like he was about to bolt. "What did you do?" Lynn finally managed to say, her voice shaking. "I protected what I built," I said, my voice steady. "You can't sell a house you don't own, and forging my signature, that's a felony." Todd raised his hands, backing toward the door. "Look, man, I didn't know about any of this. I'm out." "Don't you dare leave," Lynn snapped, turning on him. But Todd was already grabbing his cheap jacket, heading out into the rain without a second glance. The door slammed, leaving us alone in the kitchen, rain still tapping against the window. "You ruined everything," she whispered, tears forming. "No," I replied, looking her dead in the eyes. "You did that when you decided to steal from me." She stood there, shaking, the weight of her choices finally crashing down on her shoulders. I could have yelled, I could have broken things, but I didn't. Because real power isn't about shouting. It's about standing in your kitchen, calm and unshaken, while the people who tried to steal from you realize they've lost. Stay with me, because in the next part you'll see how I turned her betrayal into a lesson she'd carry for the rest of her life. The silence in that kitchen felt heavier than any deal I had ever cleared. Lynn's eyes darted to the folder, to me, then back to the rain streaking down the window. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a slow breath. "Long enough." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, mixing with the makeup she had put on to look good for a man who had just run out on her in the rain. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, voice cracking. "I was angry. You were always working, always traveling. I felt alone." I nodded, letting her speak, letting her confess the excuses she had told herself to justify betrayal. "But stealing from me?" I said quietly. "Forging my signature?" "Lynn, that's not about feeling alone, that's about greed." She sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, head in her hands. The woman I had spent nearly 3 decades with was now a stranger sitting in my house, shaking with regret, or maybe fear. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. Inside were photos, credit card statements, and hotel receipts from months of private investigation. Evidence of the affair, of the money she had siphoned out of our joint accounts into her personal ones, of the life she had been building behind my back while I was building our future. She opened it, flipping through the pages, her face draining of color with every new piece of proof. "Frank, please," she whispered. "No, Lynn," I said, standing tall. "You need to understand something. This isn't just a marriage ending. You committed fraud. You tried to steal everything I worked for." My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Paul McIntyre. "Police report filed. Detective assigned. They will contact you tomorrow." I showed her the screen. "You need to leave tonight," I said calmly, "before the police come for you in the morning." She looked up at me, eyes wide, realizing the gravity of what she had done. "Stay with me, because in the next part you'll see what happened the night she left, and how true justice finally arrived." That night the rain didn't stop. I stood by the front window of the house I had built, The house she had tried to steal, watching Lynn load 3 suitcases and a cardboard box into the back of her old sedan. She moved slowly, shoulders slumped, glancing back at the porch light I left on, maybe hoping I would stop her, maybe realizing I never would. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't apologize. She just drove off into the wet Texas night, leaving behind 28 years of marriage like it was an old lease she decided to break. The next morning, Paul arrived with a locksmith and a security company technician. By 10 o'clock a.m., the house had new deadbolts, reinforced windows, and cameras at every entrance. If Lynn ever tried to return, I would know. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Detective Susan Walsh, voice professional and firm. "Mr. Aldridge, we've reviewed the documents your attorney sent over. This is clear-cut fraud. Your wife forged your signature to sell property she didn't own. We'll be filing charges." I thanked her, hanging up as I looked around the quiet home. This wasn't how I imagined the house would feel without her. I thought it would be empty, cold, but instead it felt lighter, like the air had cleared for the first time in years. Later that week, Lynn was served with divorce papers while staying in a motel off I-35, her new life with Todd Becker already falling apart before it began. I heard she was working at a retail store trying to pick up the pieces. As for Todd, he was picked up by law enforcement in Arizona on unrelated fraud charges, facing federal prison time for schemes just like the one he tried with Lynn. You see, betrayal doesn't break a man who knows how to build. It reveals who truly belongs in your future and who never deserved a place in it. Stay with me, because in the final part, you'll see how I turned that betrayal into the best chapter of my life yet. The weeks that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet you notice when you've spent too many years living in chaos without realizing it. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m., brew a strong cup of coffee, and step out onto the deck Lynn and I had once stained together. The air over the Texas hill country was cool in the mornings, carrying the scent of cedar and the promise of a day I owned completely. I repainted the master bedroom myself, taking down the curtains she picked out, replacing them with clean blinds that let the light in. I sold the dining set we bought 20 years ago and replaced it with a sturdy oak table, one I chose for myself. It wasn't about the furniture. It was about reclaiming space inch by inch, foot by foot, until the house felt like mine again. Meanwhile, my attorney, Paul, finalized the divorce filings. Lynn had tried to argue she was owed half the house, half my business, but in Texas, fraud changes everything. The judge reviewed the evidence, credit card statements, forged documents, and photographs, and ruled in my favor. Lynn walked away with nothing but her personal belongings, a criminal record, and the realization that the man she thought was too old to notice had seen everything. The partnership I built overseas continued to thrive. Hassan called from Dubai, inviting me to expand into new markets across the Middle East and Asia, deals that would set up my business for the next decade. And for the first time in years, I could say yes without hesitation. Because betrayal didn't destroy me. It refined me. And as I sat on that deck, watching the sun rise over the hills, I realized something most men my age forget. You're never too old to start again, never too old to protect what you've built, and never too old to choose peace over chaos. Stay with me, because in the next part you'll see how I found something I never expected after betrayal. Something better than revenge. About 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself at a small coffee shop near Lake Travis, waiting for someone I hadn't planned on meeting. Her name was Evelyn. She was 59. Recently retired after 30 years of teaching high school English, with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of calm you can feel when she enters a room. We met through Hassan's wife, who insisted I needed to meet someone who understood what it meant to build a life, not just take from it. At first, I didn't think I was ready. After everything with Lynn, trust felt like a currency I didn't want to spend. But as Evelyn and I talked over coffee, the lake breeze coming in through the open windows, something felt different. She didn't ask about my business deals or what kind of truck I drove. She didn't care about how many dollars I had in the bank. She asked what books I liked to read, what trails I hiked near the house, what kind of coffee I brewed on cold Texas mornings. It was strange sitting across from someone who didn't want anything from me except a conversation. We started meeting every Friday morning, sometimes at that same coffee shop, sometimes on a walking trail near Lake Austin. No pressure, no demands, just two people who had been through hard years, learning how to smile again without forcing it. One Friday, she brought over blueprints for a small renovation project she wanted advice on, and we spent the afternoon on my deck, measuring feet of railing, talking about where the morning sun would hit. For the first time, the house felt alive, because betrayal had taken so much, but it hadn't taken my ability to build. And as Evelyn and I stood there with blueprints in hand, coffee steaming in the cool air, I realized something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about proving them wrong. It's about living a life so peaceful, so true that it becomes proof you were right all along. Stay with me, because in the final part, you'll see how I turned betrayal into the best chapter of my life yet. It's a strange thing, waking up in a house you almost lost, realizing it finally feels like home. I would brew my coffee at 6 o'clock a.m., step out onto the deck and watch the sunrise light up the Texas hill country. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of cedar and the promise of a day that was entirely mine. Evelyn would join me some mornings, bringing cinnamon rolls she baked herself, still warm in the foil. We'd sit, coffee mugs in hand, wrapped in old quilts, talking about nothing and everything. We talked about books, about trails, about the time I drove 300 miles to surprise a client during a snowstorm in Amarillo, just to keep a promise. She laughed when I told her how I used to drink cheap gas station coffee at 4 o'clock a.m. before driving to Dallas for meetings that would last 12 hours. She didn't see those stories as sacrifices. She saw them as proof of who I was. I had spent so many years fighting for deals, fighting to keep a marriage alive that was already gone, fighting to protect what I built. Now, for the first time, I was learning how to live without a battle every morning. I started fixing things around the house that had been ignored for years. I replaced the back fence 12 feet at a time, staining the cedar panels myself. I repainted the garage door, patched the small crack in the driveway, even planted a small garden in the backyard, just to watch something grow. Sometimes Evelyn would help, measuring feet of soil for the garden beds, laughing when the Texas wind would blow her plans off the deck. I wasn't just reclaiming my home. I was reclaiming myself. Because sometimes when betrayal tries to break you, the quiet work of rebuilding is the loudest statement you can make. Stay with me, because in the next part, you'll see how justice finally arrived, and how peace became the ultimate revenge. 6 months after Lynn left, the phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was tightening the hinges on the back gate I had rebuilt. It was Detective Susan Walsh. "Mr. Aldridge, I wanted to let you know that Lynn and Todd Becker were arrested this morning. Charges include grand theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy." I set down my drill, the cool Texas morning suddenly sharper. I walked inside, sat at the kitchen table, the same table Lynn once tried to sell from under me, and listened as the detective explained how Todd had tried the same scheme with 2 other women in Arizona and Florida, and one of them had recorded everything. "When we played those recordings for your wife," Detective Walsh said, "she decided to cooperate fully." The irony wasn't lost on me. Lynn thought Todd had chosen her out of love, that she was special, that they would build a new life together on the ashes of mine. Instead, she was just another name on his list, another mark in his con. She traded a life we built together for the empty promises of a man who vanished the moment consequences came knocking. The trial was quick. The evidence was undeniable. Lynn received 18 months in minimum security prison, with a criminal record that would follow her wherever she went. Todd was sentenced to 5 years in federal custody, facing additional charges in other states. Justice served, and I realized something important that day, sitting in my quiet home, coffee steaming on the table, sunlight flooding the kitchen Lynn once tried to empty. Betrayal doesn't win. Truth does. Peace does. And the man who patiently prepares, who refuses to be destroyed by someone else's greed, always has the last word. Stay with me, because in the final part, I'll show you how I found something better than revenge, and how you can too, no matter your age or what you've lost. Spring came early that year in Texas. The cherry trees along the street bloomed pink against the clear blue sky, and the air smelled like hope after months of rain and cold fronts. I found myself waking up before sunrise, brewing a pot of strong coffee, and stepping out onto the deck. Evelyn and I had started to renovate together. She brought over a small table she refinished herself, and we'd sit there, wrapped in light blankets, watching the first light touch the hills. One morning, she handed me a small notebook. "I thought you might want to write some of your stories down," she said, smiling. I opened it, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had something worth writing about again. Not the deals I closed or the miles I drove, but the lessons betrayal had taught me. That peace is worth more than pride. That starting over at 63 is not a failure but a privilege. That protecting what you build is not just about keeping your assets but guarding your spirit against bitterness. As the weeks passed, I repainted the last room in the house, a small office overlooking the front yard, where the sun hit just right around 7:15 a.m. I moved in a sturdy oak desk, one I built with my own hands, and placed Evelyn's notebook on it. Because the house Lynn tried to steal was mine now, in every way, and so was my life. I was working less, living more, and for the first time in years, laughing without that heavy feeling in my chest. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about seeing the people who wronged you fall. It's about standing tall in the life they tried to destroy, breathing in the morning air and knowing you are free. Stay with me, because in the final payoff, I will share the one truth that helped me turn betrayal into peace, and how you can too. They say betrayal is the end, but I've learned it's not. It's a door you never wanted to open, but once you step through, you find something waiting on the other side. Freedom, peace, a life you get to build on your terms. I'm 63 and I'm living proof it's never too late to protect what you've built and to start again, stronger and wiser. If you're listening to this and you've felt the sting of betrayal, I want you to know you're not alone. You can stand up, you can rebuild, and you can find peace that's louder than revenge ever will be. If you've ever felt this, share your story with me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found hope in this story, consider subscribing. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning of living free.